Simon Bisley. We've already looked at this several times. Are we really looking at it again? Yes, we're looking at it again because 2000 AD put out videos recently, just more recently. They put out the second of, I believe, a two-part short series of interviews with Simon Bisley, the creator of Slain. In the latest one, go watch it on YouTube. Just look for like 2000 AD Simon Bisley, it'll come up. In the latest one, the large portion of it, about 50 minutes or so, 50 minutes or so, they go through this book, this very book, and Simon Bisley, you can see him holding it, flipping through it, looking at each page, talking about his processes, his thoughts about the artwork and such, which is actually really good. I watched the first interview with him, and it was quite interesting. There were some interesting tidbits. But then I think maybe at the end of that interview, it cut away to the interviewer talking to the camera separately, saying that the next one was going to be them looking through this. And I was genuinely super excited for that. And it didn't entirely disappoint. So I'm just going to... So I watched the newer one where they were flipping through this. Because, obviously one of my favourite artists, obviously one of my favourite books. Art books, comic books, whatever. It is what it is. It speaks for itself. So to see the artist many years later, 40 plus years later, looking through it and commenting on it, was really quite something to see. I was really happy to watch that. I took some notes. I watched it a couple of times, took some notes. And I'm going to... Because I was thinking I might do like a video response. Not a video response, but not a reaction video, but just a video of me talking about the Simon Bisley interview and what I enjoyed and what I thought about it. But 15 minutes tops I could get out of that maybe. And also, who fucking cares? Who gives a shit what this fucking idiot thinks about, one of the most renowned comic book artists on the planet in an interview. But I thought, if nothing else, I can look through this and talk about what I appreciated for some of the things Bisley was saying and doing and being and pooing and weeing and galooing. One of the first things that I noticed, and I think this came up in the first interview as well, was the interviewer. Maybe they were playing up to the camera. I don't know. They didn't seem to be, but they seemed genuinely surprised to hear that Simon Bisley used spray paint, from a can, more specifically car paint that Simon Bisley mentioned he used. He seemed genuinely shocked to hear that. You used just spray paint just from a can? What? Oh, I assumed it was airbrush or... Which to me seems so bizarre because, obviously I have quite a background in graffiti writing, graffiti art, spray paint art and such. Lots of work with paint from a can. So I know spray paint when I see it, for the most part. I believe. So I know what I'm looking at, and maybe if you don't happen to have used spray paint ever or a lot or whatever, maybe you don't see it. You see what is obviously spray and you think, oh, they probably used an airbrush for that. But to me, there's such a clear and obvious distinction between paint from a can and paint from an airbrush. It's airbrushes, not always, but they very much tend to be a little bit more delicate and soft than paint from a can. Obviously, you can make broader and thinner, spray from the nozzle or whatever, just like I do from my nozzle, by which I mean obviously. But a spray can, especially back in the day, because this was 80s. This was done in the 80s, maybe 83. I don't. It's ripped because I'm brilliant. 89. Okay, late 80s rather than early, but still, the spray paint available in the 80s, 90s was not like today. Today, there's spray paint, many brands of spray paint made for graffiti or aerosol art. So they're very specifically pressurized cans. The certain pigments and paints they use in the cans is very specific. It tends to be quite thick, so it covers easily. The pressure is not always, but tends to be a bit lower. So the paint comes out slower. You get a bit more control over it. All the different caps that are made that can give a huge variety of different spray widths and shapes and pressure and whatever. So you really can control the paint in such a way today that you never could in the 80s, for instance. So it was literally paint, cans of paint. I know Rust-Oleum and Krylon, and there's a bunch of others that are made for like household use, like cars, projects in the home, whatever. And they come out with like one amount of pressure, and it's a lot of paint very quickly, and it just goes psh, 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 onto whatever you're painting. And it's a bit more, if I may be so pretentious, a bit more bold and brash of a tool to use, especially if you're going to use it in art. And to me, it's very clear when that's used rather than an airbrush. Because Simon Bisley, he looked through this and he mentioned this, for instance, how this is all spray paint. You like mask off areas and you paint this or paint that and then paint over these bits to bring out the shape of the horns, the silhouette, whatever. So there would have been loads of red and black paint under all of this, and then he painted the grey around it, and then sprayed some black on top, and then some white, and with masked off areas that you can see. That was just paint. And the fact that the interviewer seemed so taken aback by that he was like, "What? I can't believe you were using spray paint from a can to do all of this stuff." And it's just like, yeah, obviously. I mean, you see airbrush used in comics, and it looks similar, but there are visible differences. But Simon does mention in the interview, Simon, my pal, Si, how using spray paint, especially as like a basis, or even spraying over parts, can really tie an image together, like unify it. I believe he used the word unify. I'm looking at my notes that I have. Spray paint can unify the whole piece, because it really can sort of like it on its own sort of puts paint all over it, so it has this one colour that is dispersed amongst the piece, so it almost pulls the rest of the piece into the centre of where the spray was used while pushing the colour out. It's a pretty cool thing to use, spray paint. And I think that's just sort of, it fits with who Simon Bisley is and what he does. Being a metalhead, a Harley Davidson rider, he probably used the paint for like his bikes and stuff, as well as art and whatnot. But that was probably one of the things I'll talk most about, is just that fact, the whole spray paint side of things. But it was cool to hear Simon Bisley talk about that. Also very cool that this was his first painted comic book work. Like, he painted some ABC Warrior pieces, like I guess for covers or whatever, and then when he drew the ABC Warriors, that was his first comic book work. He'd never drawn comic books before, apparently, or comics or anything. So for ABC Warriors to be his first comic was insane, and for this to be his first painted comic is even more insane. It's like this feels like the work of someone who has been doing this shit for decades and knows what they're doing and is fully on top of their shit. But then to know that he was just sort of, a lot of it was experimenting and figuring shit out and thinking, oh, this works, this doesn't. This apparently is very heavily inspired by Conan, by Frazetta, who he references a lot. He as a almost an obvious influence on him in terms of his structures, his compositions, his body parts and shit. He does talk about how he met Frazetta, and they talk fairly regularly, like on the phone while he was drawing and painting comics and stuff, which is very cool, obviously. But he said how Frazetta told him, like, don't do the arms so big. What's wrong? Give your guys like this size of a big arm, not this size of a big arm. He apparently thought Simon Bisley's anatomy was just ridiculous. He obviously liked his work. He appreciated that he had influenced it, I guess, and liked Bisley's work. And obviously liked Bisley, which they spoke regularly. But yeah, apparently he just thought it was ridiculous, the size and shapes he'd make his character's arms and such. I think there's a bit. Well, it might be a bit later on. There's one particular panel somewhere. So one thing I noted is that I think when I look through these things, obviously I don't know, so I only assume. But when it gets to these parts, and there's the conversation here, I look at it and go, oh, he's probably using a lot less paint here, and you know, doing these drawings. They do look cool. It sort of fits the vibe of the thing, but this probably is a lot quicker to get a page done like this than it is like this. So he works through it that way. But apparently not. Apparently for the first like chunk, the first half or third or even 2/3 of the book, that wasn't the case. Like, he was doing parts like this apparently to show like the different sort of setting and the different vibe of what's going on, rather than trying to speed up and get shit done. That wasn't the case towards the end of the book apparently, and I think that becomes somewhat clear. This is the panel I was looking for. He pointed this one out specifically, saying how it's shit. He thinks it's ridiculous, and apparently he'd like blow it up, not like explode it, but like enlarge the image to show a friend, just be like, look how shit this is, which is funny. But what he also said was, but that's sort of, it doesn't matter in a lot of cases if it's like shit, the anatomy shit, the body shape, because I can see what he's saying now that he has said he considers it shit, where it's just like almost a weird kind of sausage shape with a bit of shading and stuff. There's not a lot going on there, but I previous to him pointing it out, I never really noticed. I just looked at it as just a small panel showing what is happening, and that's exactly what Simon Bisley said, was it doesn't really matter in this instance if it's a bit shit, because it shows you what you need to see. It's just him climbing, so it's whatever. Which is good to hear from, you know, someone of Bisley's status and stature, that he's not trying to make... Well, maybe he is, but he at least recognises that it doesn't matter if some things aren't perfect, if not everything is on point and fully brilliantly rendered and realised, because sometimes you just need to just tell the story, just get the bits out there, get the bits done. And that was a big thing for me, a big part of the interview that I enjoyed of him looking through this, was that he was pointing out a lot of like what he didn't like, which, you know, I do all the time with my art. Like gun Viking, I go through gun Viking and I point out this bit and this bit and this bit. Shit, I want to redo this, I want to redo that, this bit's garbage, this bit. And Simon Bisley does the same shit, which is comforting to know. I mean, I'm aware that many, if not all, artists feel that way about a lot of their work, at least some of the time. But it is comforting to hear Simon Bisley be very openly like that, looking through this work of his and going, oh, what was I doing here? I think this was one of those points he pointed out where he was a little bit like, what is this? Like, he clearly, again, in more or less his words, wasn't putting in the effort here. Like, what is that? But then he was like, oh, it's kind of cool because it gets the point across. But like, I think on reflection, maybe he would have preferred to make these pieces more detailed as opposed to just being in almost solid silhouette. Which again is really, really cool to hear that. I really appreciated hearing that. There was one point, I don't know if I... Oh, it was literally this panel. I think he was talking about it here, where there's all the details. There's like jars and bottles on the shelf. There's shelves here full of scrolls and things. There's all these details that's like, they need to be in there. You can't just have like an empty room, which means you have to paint them. So this is where he was saying he finds ways around like spending hours and hours painting bottles and scrolls and stuff. And he mentions using, at some point, starting to use coloured pencil for certain things. I think a lot of times for hair on women. I don't know if it was earlier on that he mentioned it. It might not be. I don't know. It might be a bit later on. And I think that's probably one of those like time-saving things. Is rather than mixing several shades of a colour for hair, if you have a darkish underpainting and then just sort of like scribble some pencil over it, it looks like strands of hair and texture. And you can get multiple sort of shades and colour out of just one pencil. And it looks like he almost certainly... No, maybe not certainly, but it looks like the light behind these sort of like iron bar looking segments, it looks like those might have been coloured in with pencil. The spray paint for the underpainting over the ink, and then the littlest bit of paint on these like jars and bottles and scrolls, just to like slightly bring them out of the spray painted stuff underneath. Just little bits. And this, as a panel, you can see minimal paint, basic line work, just getting that bit done. Which, like I say, he's not speeding through or trying to speed through the book, but he recognises you can't afford to spend a day on the panel because you've got close-up bits like this that you sort of do put a bit more effort into. So page by page, he's finding ways to sort of speed the process up at least somewhat. No word on Akko sucking milk directly out of a goat's udder. Yeah, that's fair. He doesn't have to comment on anything, but and on everything. But a little something, a little mention somewhere would be nice. He does mention throughout a lot of his influences. He mentions by name specific bodybuilders, which is, that's obviously something he's into. But to me, it's like, oh, he actually knows the names of bodybuilders. He's not just looking up random photos or whatever, which is very, very good. As well as other artists and like movies and stuff, movie elements, characters' faces here and there where he's referenced them, which is quite cool. Not reference them to be, look, this is a reference from this film, but more in a way like he used that film, that character, actor, whatever, as a reference point to create an artwork. That was another thing I noted. Oh, and so like he does a lot of this stuff here and there. Some parts he didn't, but then certain parts he did attribute to like Gustav Klimt with all of his ornate decorative parts of his paintings, and that certainly comes across in certain parts throughout the book, which is cool to see. These parts again showing a change in tone as opposed to just quickly getting the page done, but there has to be some kind of benefit in the fact that this page, it's drawn very well, and I don't for an instant suspect that he just quickly got these pages done, just fucking whatever, because there's a lot of like care and detail gone into the mark making of the rendering of like the wrinkles on the skin and the hair and stuff. They're very well done drawings, but they had to have been quicker to paint than all of this stuff. And they're barely painted, just a little bit of red spray paint here and there. He mentions some materials and medium that he's used here and there. Sadly, I didn't get any clarification on if he was using a blue ballpoint pen here, which I'm 99% sure he was. And again, there's no need for him to point out every little bit. I think at one point earlier on he was like, "Oh, why have I used blue there? That's a bit weird," but I guess it works. And a similar instance here where like he was using a blue ballpoint pen clearly for the drawings. He just felt that way in the moment, I guess. He was saying he hates this. He thinks this is absolute garbage. The woman sort of leaping over the bed to grab the sword. He thinks this is rubbish, but he really likes this. And I think he did sort of say that like it sucks that this isn't better, but this is good, so it pays off. You get if there's going to be bad shit, you get that out of the way because it pays off when you have the good shit here. And apparently, and I can see it now, the brown here is his actual blood. Like apparently he was working on his bike or something, cut his finger or whatever, and was like, "Oh, I'll use that and put his blood." And you can see like it looks like a brown wash, but now he said that's his actual blood. I can see that. Oh, it's signed there as well. That's quite cool. It looks like blood. But he said, again in the interview, how he did that thinking, "Hey, cool, yeah, I'll use my own blood in this piece," because this guy's had his hand cut off, so there is blood across the bed. But then it dried and he was like, "Oh, it's turned brown now." That's not so great. So then he used red paint on top of that, which it gives it a dirtiness, which is quite cool. But that has been an issue I've had in the past where like I've been the edgy teen artist using my own blood to paint things. I used to do that quite a bit. But if you don't protect it or cure it or whatever, varnish it or something very, very quickly, like you've got to let it dry and then quickly varnish it, because if you let it dry and continue to dry, it will just sort of crack and turn brown and horrible, and it looks like poopy and not blood. And which completely, like if you're trying to use blood, your own blood, to paint shit that looks cool like blood, you want it to look like blood, not like you're painting with shit. Really, let's be honest. Apparently he really liked this. Was it Pat Mills who Pat Mills, who wrote that this entity, this demon thing, gets its hand shoved in its mouth and starts eating itself down to nothing, turns inside out and pops, and its teeth just go back into the cauldron. Apparently Simon really liked that idea, but thought it was so insane, and like was saying, "How do you come up with that? Like where does that idea come from?" And it's an idea I've seen in several places by several different artists that I have no reason to believe I connected in any way. So it's and the Ouroboros or whatever, the snake eating its own tail, that's a thing. So it's not too outrageous to me, an idea to have that happen. But Simon apparently thought it was just bizarre and weird, and he, it was cool and he liked it. He obviously enjoyed drawing it and whatnot. So that was a cool thing to have noted. Let me just look at my notes, see what I have and haven't spoken about. Oh, okay, yeah, so there's a couple of notes here that sort of one feeds into the other. He mentions how, people, maybe he's been spoken of in a certain way, and people have said this, but, maybe some people consider him to be like one of the best British comic book artists, which like, yeah, certainly one of the most inspirational. He was absolutely, like, painted comics were a thing around this time. Certainly more so in Europe. But he really did put it out there and make it like his own thing. I'm getting a little bit off track. Also, he really liked this panel. He pointed this out and was like, "Oh shit, that was really good," and that will feed into what I'm saying in a bit. So yeah, he noted how, you know, many people might say and might refer to Simon Bisley as one of like the greatest comic book artists. He, I guess, reasonably so, disagrees, because he says, especially, you know, something like this where he hadn't really done a lot of comics, like he doesn't consider his artwork to flow across the page from like panel to panel, which I can absolutely see, because there are certain artists who, I guess, they have more of a knack for like design and graphic design and, you know, page composition and these sorts of things, and they really do make the art flow across the page, and all the panels work in tandem. Everything, the whole page comes together, and even whole spreads of pages work with each other, and you can sort of follow a trail of the story through the pages. Some artists are just better at that than others, and some do it incredibly well. I can't think of any right now, but there are some out there that do it really, really well. And I guess I never really thought about it with Bisley, because I'm always just so happy to look at the work, just so stunned by like the paintings and shit, that I never really cared about whether or not it flowed well as a story, because I think that's what Bisley does, and that is sort of, if I can look at my notes, rather than it being a flowing storytelling page, he's making, I think what he said was, he's making statements. Like every panel is supposed to be like, in a way, big and expressive and saying something on its own, and they are used to tell a story, as opposed to the page as a whole having some overarching shape and form to it, which I think is perfectly valid, especially because that's largely how I paint my comic, or try to paint my comics. I try to make things flow sometimes, but then often I feel I can get bogged down with that, and maybe the artwork suffers as a result. Because it might be one of those skills that like I just haven't worked on enough, or maybe I'm just not naturally gifted with that spark that makes you be able to make pages work in that kind of way. Also, a lot of my influences are like Simon Bisley, so it's perfectly reasonable that that's sort of how my artwork goes. The interviewer, I think, mentioned like in these pages how you've got big block colours for the backgrounds and stuff, and how that he wondered if that was maybe a time-saving thing of where the deadlines were catching up to him, and I don't think it was specifically here. I think he noted the backgrounds, but that might have been more of a design thing as opposed to a time-saving thing. I think it is sort of moments more towards the end where you can really point out this is obviously where he was using thicker, chunkier paint, less of it, and just trying to get through. Apparently he got in trouble for this. And I know I pointed it out probably every time I look through, where he's obviously photocopied this panel and then just cut and pasted it 3 times here and here. Apparently the editors or whoever disliked that very, very much. I don't know if they thought it was lazy, they thought it was bad storytelling, they thought it was maybe in bad taste. Like he's supposed to be, they're paying him to create artwork, and then he spends a third of a page with photocopied images. Like, that could be considered cheating. But I mean, the only other thing you could really do is to repeat the same image, but then draw it from a different angle and a different angle, and then it's like, almost, what's the point? And I quite like having this in here because it's a quick little like boom, 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 where the stone is speaking to him every night, and it's just like a continuous, constant thing. It works for the thing, but I can absolutely see why the editors might have been a bit PO'd by that. So following on from talking about his thoughts on him being considered one of the best British comic book artists, he still throughout him looking through this and towards the end as well, he was happy to say how, you know, he likes looking through his work and noting when it's good. Like he should be able to, you know. This book, as he mentions, this book basically put him where he is today. He was working for 2000 AD, did some ABC Warrior comics, and there's every chance he might have excelled in some other way if he hadn't done this book. But doing this really fucking put him on the map and like solidified his name and his place in comic books and in art and shit in general. And so it's perfectly valid that he looked through it and go, this is really good, that's fucking great, this is amazing. He was really happy with this. This is based on a photo, at least this portion I believe he mentioned. Apparently he really liked this character, throughout the comic. He enjoyed drawing and painting him. And yeah, this, again, like, because I think I've pointed out how this is a really good painting. I really like this. The colours, the lighting, the composition, the shape it creates and everything. The depth from him to them and the background and everything. But now he mentions part of it, at least with reference from a photo, you can really see that. Like, it looks a little bit more sort of, maybe not realistic, but a little bit more, I don't know, real, I guess. Believable almost. A bit less fantastical than some of the other stuff. Like, this almost looks like the sort of thing you could find in a 20-year-old sketchbook, like an extreme close-up of a face with the eye, whereas the lighting and the mood of this looks a little bit more sort of like grounded and real, I guess. So that being photo referenced sort of makes that a thing that I can see now. Really fell off there, didn't I? And that was so. It's really cool to see him go through this book and point out what he doesn't like, because it almost humanises him. Because Simon Bisley, love it or hate it, he basically is at legend status. I can talk all the shit I want about his more modern, or some of his more modern artwork, and I think that's one of the things I hadn't noted down, but had sort of thought about to say. Which is one of the reasons I even thought of or maybe I'll do a video talking about the interview. I get the impression from a few things he said in the first video interview they did that maybe he just hasn't been trying in the last few years. Like in his more recent work, certainly, that I've maybe needlessly pointed out how, new Bisley's a load of shit. But it sounds to be the case that like maybe he was, resting on his laurels a bit and just not putting in the effort. Maybe he's had his time and then he's just, he's working for work. He's not necessarily working for the love of the game or whatever. But it sounds like, and from a couple of things I've seen, looks a little bit like he may be revitalised in some kind of way and he may be coming up again. I don't expect another Slain or another Judgment on Gotham, but it was cool to hear, and I don't feel like he expressly said that, but I think certain things he said pointed towards that, and that's maybe some of it is my own interpretation, but it certainly feels like he's taking stock and feeling like he wants to put out some real quality work. So we might see some new real quality work from Simon Bisley, which would be really, really fucking cool. So outside of him, or beside him saying how he thinks this is shit, he thinks that's shit, he doesn't like this, doesn't like that, he wants to scrap this, redo that. I love the fact that he was also looking through his books, or this book specifically, going, I really like this. Apparently he really liked these underwater segments. Apparently he had a lot of fun painting them, which I think it does kind of show. I believe I pointed out how these parts look quite fun to paint, where it's lots of water, literally just water and thin paint to make these marks and brushstrokes and stuff, and thicker paint for these parts and for the suit and stuff. And the interviewer said, like, oh, again, was that like saving time, just using large areas of thick paint? And Simon pointed out that no, it still takes time to get these details and render these bits and stuff. You still have to sort of pay attention to it. And apparently he really enjoyed and really likes these pages of these underwater moments. And this was, he pointed out, as like an obvious nod to Klimt with the details in the decoration. It seems a couple of times as well where he maybe doesn't believe in his own work here and there, where he thinks certain parts look like they could be in different places even though they're in the same setting. And he did mention an issue he had early on, especially with Slane's face looking different panel to panel, page to page, which apparently the editors had a bit of an issue with, and I certainly can relate. That's one of the reasons it took me so long to really even try to make any kind of comic, was because I was so unsure of my skills, and I didn't believe I could draw one person to look the same panel to panel to panel. Then I made Gun Viking, and he changes panel to panel, and that's fine because it's part of the whole thing. So that was good to see. And then so he said how, he thinks, maybe somewhere he falls down is having a consistency and panels looking like they're taking place in the same setting. So he liked this element here, the decoration on this blanket or duvet or whatever, because it sort of ties the scene together, so you know they're in the same place because the decoration is the same throughout, which is a neat thing. Also a neat thing, apparently, and this I didn't know, I assumed it was all painted on one big board. I guess he painted them maybe even bigger than this, or maybe about this size, which is pretty big, I guess, for a comic panel. Almost certainly bigger than that, actually. Apparently he might have even painted them all on the one board, but then he cut them out, the panels, and then stuck them onto a fresh sheet of paper so that the borders would be perfectly clean, which I always thought he'd mask the panels off, and some of them he wouldn't, as you can see, where this has got jagged edges. But no, apparently I don't know if all of it or most of it or a lot of it, but he pointed out some places where, where he'd cut the panels out from the original painting and stick them down onto a fresh sheet to get these clean white borders, which is really, really smart. It's just a thing. I like that he pointed that out. That's one thing I like that he pointed out. So it's cool that he pointed out what he doesn't like. It's cool that he pointed out what he does like, that he is still enjoying his work and he's perfectly allowed to enjoy his work. And we all are. I can speak for myself. I make work that I want to look at. I make drawings and paintings, for the most part, that I want to see, that I want to make exist. And so I feel I'm perfectly within my rights to enjoy that I've made something I'm happy with, that I'm proud of, that I like looking at. And so it's good to hear someone of Simon Bisley's status say the same. Blah, blah, blah. Slane, Horned God, Simon Bisley. So apparently in these, heading into these pages here, it was quite almost funny to hear how... So the comic came out weekly, I assume in 6-page increments or whatever it was. But he would know, he'd get the script and whatever maybe 6 months or so ahead of time. So he had potentially plenty of time to make the work before it went to print. So he like I said, he didn't really feel the pinch of the deadline for most of the book. But apparently, he'd take however long it took him to create these pages, but then that would take a little bit longer and a little bit longer, and the deadlines for when the work needed to be finished would come closer and closer and closer, until I believe the last chunk of the book, maybe here, where you can certainly see much thicker paint, many fewer layers, potentially less attention paid to rendering and details. If you know what to look for, you can see it, where this is clearly painted way, way, way quicker than that was a good one actually, than something like this. The difference is almost stark. If you're just flipping through the book, you probably wouldn't notice, but if you compare this to this, that's still very, very rendered, but even so, you can see where he's not cutting corners, but sort of speeding through the process a bit more. This axe is quite watery, quite washy compared to other places. Lots of heavy shadows just to, block out parts of the painting. So yeah, apparently towards the end here is when he was speeding up, because he was feeling the deadlines creeping up on him more and more. And I thought that was interesting to know. No, I thought it was interesting to know that he wasn't feeling the deadlines at all for the most of the book. I think that's really good, because I think there's arguments to be made either way about the pressure of a deadline can spur someone to put some real energy into their work because they're just trying to get it out, just trying to get the art done. But then there's also the argument to be made that you have to give an artist time to create what it is that needs doing. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't rush an artist. You have to just let the artwork happen as and when it does. So it's cool that for the most part he was able to just fucking take his time and make the artwork he wanted to make, and it obviously made the comic better. I think if he was feeling rushed from all of the deadlines the whole way through, the book would be nowhere near. Well, it would still be good, but it probably wouldn't have anywhere near the impact it ended up having. He pointed out this panel. He said how this to him looks a lot more sort of realistic or 3D compared to a lot of the other ones, which I agree with. I think it's a combination. He pointed out how it doesn't necessarily have a strong, bold outline put onto it. But I think it's a combination of that and the spray used here for the double lighting, along with how it's lit and how it's rendered, the textures and stuff, and the little white highlights is a combination of things, and the lack of outline that come together. The white spray in the background is part of that as well, which sort of helps solidify it as an object rather than a painting. And it does. It has a certain physicality to it that many other pieces don't have, which is strange how that can happen, because I find that happen in my own work too. Or let's talk about me. Every now and again I'll paint one face or one panel, and I'll just look at it and be like, oh shit, I made something happen there. I don't know how, but a combination of sort of accidental things coming together just made this look the way it looks. I think he mentioned he really liked this, which I really, really like. That's a really great, really intimidating little series of panels of the horned god shambling his way towards Slain. Lots of coloured pencil, again, super quick just to get the background in. And it also, with the lines, it gives sort of motion, it gives action. It's a bit more frenetic than just, a solid painted background. I don't know if I've gone past it or not. There was one panel in particular I wanted to point out. And yeah, you can see here, he must have gotten this page. He probably did both of these pages in a day, because if not less, because you can see bright, big, bold colours for the backgrounds, very clumpy, I don't know, heavy brush strokes, minimal paint, still used very well, used very effectively. I don't mean to minimise the artwork, but it's just clear to see where he was speeding through the pages rather than where he was really taking his time. And yeah, there's one panel which it was really interesting. Oh, this one. Something I didn't even think of, but again, now he mentions it, I can absolutely see it. So apparently he painted the warp spasming Slain and then cut it out and then stuck it on top of this blue painted piece of paper, which gives a really effective solid shape against like the lightning strike of the background. And I can even see what he's done as well, because he said what he does is he cuts it out and then with like a black marker colours in just the edge just here of the bit he's cut out, so that when it's stuck down and photographed, you don't have like this white highlight from where the light's hitting the top of the cutout, so it stays sort of shadowed. And you can almost see that there is a faint, very super hair thin black line. You can see that the light has obviously still caught, but that, you know, it looks like it could have just been painted on top of the spray paint. But the fact that it's cut out, it's a little bit more experimental, which I like, because it adds a collage element. It does add a boldness that may or may not, you know, be able to be there if it was painted on. Because even if you painted this as crisp as it is, there's bound to be some kind of like overlap, a little bit of splat here or there, a little bit of stray blob of paint, a bit of spray, a little loose pen mark sticking out somewhere. The fact that it's cut out so it is a solid shape definitely adds to that. And that was an interesting thing, I feel. I think I went past another one. Oh, I think it was quite an early on. It might have even been one I pointed out for something else. There's just like two more things I want to say. One of them I completely forgot to mention when the panel was... I think it's one of the covers. Bear with me, I'll get there. Don't worry, don't fret. Here. So he was saying how that looks like Braveheart, but then he realised, like, oh, actually, apparently, because this was made before Braveheart, apparently the people who were making Braveheart contacted Simon Bisley because they'd seen Slain, and they were like, I guess wanted Bisley to work in some kind of, I assume, conceptual art position on the film, which would have been super cool. Though he said, I guess for whatever reason, it didn't work out. He didn't end up working with them on the film. But they obviously took heavy inspiration from Slain for the film Braveheart, because you can absolutely see it. Which is perfectly fine. I'm not suggesting they shouldn't have it. I'm just saying it's quite a fun thing to have noted and to point out and to have, you know, confirmed, which is cool. And finally, I think so. My last note here is that I felt he could have spent more time on certain pages, because some of them, certainly some of the battle scenes and stuff, he flipped through quite quickly. He was just sort of flipping through, going like, yeah, which is, you know, it's totally fine, it's whatever. But to have this whole book and to go through it as the artist, one of the great artists 40 years later, to go through this book and talk about it, I feel like he went through it quite quickly, which maybe he didn't want to spend hours and hours going through it, but, you know, as a fan, as an art fan, as a Bisley fan, I would have liked to have seen him basically spend 20-30 minutes on each and every page talking in great detail about every little bit. But there's certain parts, especially some of the battle scenes and stuff, where I would have liked to have heard him talk about, I don't know, putting compositions together, or how he referenced things, like stuff like this. Was this like horses and stuff? Was it all referenced? Did he have trouble with any of it? Was there any particular parts he really enjoyed, that he's really happy with in these spreads specifically? But like I say, he really, like, these pages he basically just flipped through. He was like, oh yeah, cool. He mentioned some stuff about like blood and violence and bad taste and whatever, changing in times and things. But in terms of like talking about the art, there was not necessarily as much as I would have loved. But I'm realising, as I'm talking about it this whole time, I've obviously taken enough from him looking through the book that I now realise it's fine. for the one little thing, the one minor issue I had was I would have liked the video to have been 3 to 5 hours long, which isn't really isn't a remotely reasonable expectation to have. So ultimately, I was really happy with. I was really happy to see that. I haven't noted down to mention, but there is a video of him ever so slightly starting to paint this on YouTube. You can, it's out there, it's findable, which is, it's very, very cool. But again, I wish I could have seen him painting the whole thing. But it's still cool to see him start painting this with just like a Sharpie for the body and then like a sponge to get the green on there. So apparently there was like some, I don't know if that was a small part, but there was some kind of documentary made, and so they showed him painting some of it. Apparently they spoke to him as well. Apparently, and again, this is just from Simon Bisley saying it in the interview, a newspaper came out after the documentary that was basically mocking Simon Bisley's accent. Apparently, hey, he had quite a West Country accent. He spoke like a farmer, like that. And he was talking about having some green on there. And this newspaper put out a headline that was not directly, but essentially sort of making light or making fun of Simon Bisley's accent, which is quite mean, but quite funny. It's a funny anecdote, and it's a funny little thing about this. And like the fact that I was watching him talk about that as he got to this page, and I was like, oh, I've seen a little video, which is obviously a little clip from that documentary, so it's cool. So it ties together and it checks out. His story checks out. That's a really fucking cool painting though, so that's cool too. I will be honest with you, I didn't think I'd be talking for quite so long looking through the book, talking about the Simon Bisley interview. It makes sense, but I figured it would be like 30 minutes or so, and then I was going to draw a slane and talk about a bunch of shit. I realised it's whatever, it doesn't really matter. We'll have that bit that's just been looking through the book. That's the main focus of the bit. And look, I drew a slane. It's all right. Somewhat happy with parts of it. I like the hair. I used a brush with ink to swoosh the hair out a bit. Maybe I could have even gone a bit wilder with it. But yeah, I mean, it's completely fair to have a little one-off, isn't it? Just one episode just to talk about Mr. Bisley and his work and his thoughts on his work, and my thoughts on his thoughts on his work, and my thoughts on his work as seen by him while giving his thoughts on his work, and my thoughts on that, etc., etc. Anyway,